been so busy this semester. I just haven't been able to apply a little bit of foreboding stuff.
You should carve some time out. Go for it.
I was super worried about it, especially after
The other ones are
CS is really important. Yeah.
And the market's doing like I had friends who applied for like 200, 300. Only like
You're
two got
kidding.
back to them.
Yeah, I get that all the time. I just feel like I want to give up.
Yeah, but I mean,
Like, I might as well just like go work at McDonald's.
You need to write AI to just apply for you.
No, that's
right?
already
So
there's
it's-
already something for that called simplified jobs.
Okay.
Yeah, I use it.
And I use it too, and it still takes too long.
And just see like what
Yeah,
they
cover
expect.
everything for you, basically.
All
right.
Applying to smaller companies.
See like
Yeah.
Okay, now's as good a time as ever.
notice that Ohio's like
This, it's not as loud, but it's way bigger, and so that's really what counts. Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to RF on Election Day. You know, this is probably the first time that this has happened, that we've had this on Election Day.
It definitely is, because
yeah.
we were always on Thursday.
Yes, we have not. If I was reading on my way here a piece that was written in a column called Dispatch Faith, and the question is, can we live with each other after this election? And the author, whose name I can't remember, essentially said, well, it doesn't matter the answer to that question because we already are. So, and all of us, regardless of ideology and all of those differences, are going to be living with each other after this. So we should do this in a way that is consistent with faith and consistent with trust in the reality that there is a higher power beyond this. And so I just want to leave you with that requires us to not heed politicians' words when they say that this is the most important election of our lifetimes and catastrophic things like that, because not only in historical terms is that not true, but in religious terms that's also not true, where the trajectories of our lifetimes are not going to be affected by these things, and I have to convince myself of that from time to time. But I hope that we can pay attention to that and live our lives together in a way that's consistent with either Christian faith or non-Christian faith, if that applies more to you. But one thing that is important as we live together is a recognition of those things that are objective. And this is what Dr. Byron Gilroy is going to speak with us about this evening, because this is really important to strike a balance between harmony as people and compromise of things that are objective truths. And that's an extreme that none of us want to fall into. So approaching this in a wise way and an apologetically minded way is extremely important, especially in this season. So, Dr. Gilroy, please enlighten us about this.
All right. So, as I've been here throughout this semester, I'm going to kind of be an odd man. I carry a clipboard.
Yeah.
And the reason why I carry the clipboard is because if I don't have my notes, I will go on tangents, and then you will be asking the question, and what's the point? And given the limited amount of time, I don't want to have to keep on going back answering the question, hey, so what was the point of that story? So that's what the notes are for. And let's go ahead and dive in. So as Kenneth mentioned, it is interesting that this would be the day that we talk about, is morality something that is objectively true, or is it subjective? Do I get to determine my own morality, what is right and what is wrong? I don't know if many of you are familiar with the Mises Institute. Anybody? Aha, there you go. Are you an Austrian yourself? I'm open to the idea. Very good. That's all I ask, is being open to the idea. So there's an Austrian economist named Tho Bishop wrote an article, and I didn't read the whole article, but the title was interesting, given the election. He said half the country will disagree with the outcome of the election. right? So this isn't going to be something that we have unanimity on. Obviously, we never do. But as Kenneth said, there's something more fundamentally important, and that is objective morality. And so no matter who takes office, objective morality will always be important and something that we need to have clear understanding. So that's what we're going to talk about. So I want to start with a short story that I wrote in order to introduce our topic tonight. So the title of the short story is A Matter of Moral Truth. Dr. Aaron Hale had barely unpacked his books when he found himself at the heart of a controversy. Having recently defended his dissertation on moral objectivity, Dr. Hale had been appointed as an assistant professor in philosophy at Sutherland University, a renowned institution that prided itself in pushing intellectual boundaries. Sutherland's ivy-covered walls seemed to stand as a testament to centuries of debate, progress, and understanding. But Dr. Hale's arrival sparked a different kind of conversation, a debate that soon spiraled into full-blown ideological clash. With a background in both ethics and apologetics, Dr. Hale was an oddity in academia. His belief in objective morality, a steadfast conviction that certain moral truths were universal and binding regardless of culture or personal preference, set him apart from a majority of his peers at Sutherland. He had anticipated some resistance, but he hadn't imagined it would come so soon and from so many corners. The trouble began in his second week during an open seminar for philosophy students entitled, "Is Morality Real?" The question was broad enough to invite thinkers from across the moral spectrum, and it attracted students and faculty alike. As Dr. Hale introduced his view that morality was not merely subjective, but grounded in objective truth, whispers, subtle scoffs rippled through the room. A senior faculty member, Dr. Evelyn Craddock, raised her hand and offered a polite yet pointed rebuttal. "Dr. Hale," she began, her tone as practiced as her critique, "don't you think it a bit presumptive to claim that morality is objective? History shows us the vast cultural diversity of moral systems. What's right in one society is often wrong in another." Dr. Hale took a deep breath. This was the argument he expected. "I appreciate that view, Dr. Craddock," he replied, "but I would argue that these variations are interpretations, not counterexamples. Beneath the surface of these diverse systems are the core principles like respect for life and fairness that are merely universal." Dr. Craddock tilted her head, her eyes narrowed. "But is that really universality, or is it mere coincidence? Your position feels like a dressed-up version of cultural imposition, insisting that some moral framework must underlie all of us, whether we recognize it or not." This sparked a flurry of debate, with students and professors alike voicing their opinions. Dr. Hale found himself defending this position on multiple fronts. He cited everything from historical texts to ethical philosophy, countering that moral relativism. This idea that morality was purely subjective could not account for why humanity, time and again, seemed to coalesce around certain ethical standards. Over the following weeks, the debate spread beyond the classroom and into the university corridors, dining halls, and faculty lounges. Dr. Hale's views were dissected in nearly every campus publication, and student activists began protesting, claiming that his views invalidated lived experiences by imposing a single standard of morality. Sutherland University known for its liberal ideas, was rapidly turning against its new professor. One evening, Dr. Hale was summoned to a private meeting with Dr. Marcus Lang, the head of the philosophy department. Dr. Lang, though known for a stoic composure, looked intense. "Aaron, the faculty has been concerned. Some feel that your views might be at odds with inclusive values we promote here. Your lecture, while insightful, are being seen as a kind of moral authoritarianism." Dr. Hale felt his pulse quicken. Moral authoritarianism? I don't claim that my view is the only valid perspective, only that there's a solid case for moral objectivity. I want students to think, not merely accept. Lang sighed. But you must realize that students, particularly those exploring their own identities and ethics, may not take well to being told that their morality could be wrong. For many, morality is personal. Suggesting otherwise, well, it unsettles people. But isn't that the purpose of philosophy? Dr. Hale challenged. To unsettle, to question, to seek truth? If we can't even debate the existence of moral truths, then what are we doing here? Dr. Lang hesitated, clearly caught between administrative responsibility and philosophical curiosity. "Aaron, this university fosters intellectual freedom, but it also prioritizes the well-being of its students. If this debate becomes disruptive, you may be asked to temper your stance." As the semester wore on, Dr. Hale continued to field criticism, both within the university and outside of it. His lecture became a place of intense debate, with students packing the rooms to witness and participate in the battle over moral objectivity. Yet as the tension rose, something remarkable began to happen. A handful of students approached Dr. Hale after class. "We don't agree with everything you say," one admitted, "but we appreciate that you're challenging us. I've never thought of this deeply about my beliefs before." Others told him that his argument had forced them to question not only their moral positions, but the very nature of truth. Dr. Hale realized that these were the students he had come to Sutherland for, the ones willing to grapple with difficult questions, even if the answers were uncomfortable. By the end of the semester, Dr. Hale was a polarizing figure on campus, respected by some, reviled by others. He knew his future at Sutherland was uncertain. Yet his final lecture, he felt a sense of quiet triumph. He stood for the pursuit of truth, even when it cost him. As the students filed out, a young woman lingered, approaching Dr. Hale with a tentative smile. "Dr. Hale," she said softly, "I don't know if morality is objective or subjective, but your class made me want to find out for myself. And for that, well, I thank you." Dr. Hale watched her go, feeling the weight of a hard-won victory. He had come to Sutherland to teach, but in the end, he had reminded himself and his students that the search for truth was never meant to be comfortable. And perhaps, he mused, that was its own kind of moral truth. I read that story. You can go ahead and click. I read that story because this question is primary. Why God? Why do we need God in building a case for the objective of morality? Dr. Cornelius Van Til is one of the, in my view, is one of the 20th century's greatest minds, especially when it comes to apologetics. And he says this, he says, "True Christian apologetics appears circular only because all truth turns upon God. We cannot rightly understand any fact apart from him." Now, we've talked about it this semester. We've talked about avoiding circular reasoning, right? Starting with one idea and then saying that we're going to show something only because that initial idea is the case. Well, I would say that is improper reasoning, and rightfully so. But I think that when it comes down to truth, when it comes down to morality, there's a certain circularity that we cannot and should not avoid. All right, go ahead with the next one. Okay. Friedrich Nietzsche says, have your way, I have my way. As for the right way, it does not exist. That sounds like popular culture, does it not? That you have your way, I have my way, and if you just leave me alone, we'll all be good. Go ahead and click. So, here's some ideas of the ways that people may like. For example, torturing babies for fun. The Indian practice of widow burning. The priest sexual abusing children and church authorities covering it up. Rape, murder of innocent people. Now, if you know of a culture in which these things are deemed right, we could think of some. It says right here, an Indian practice, right? So there's a culture that burns widows, right? And that for them, correct, is right. But is it right? Or is this an interpretation of a much more deep and underlining violation of moral principles? We'll get into that. Click. Oscar Wilde. Nothing succeeds like excess. Nothing is good or bad, only charming or dull. That seems fairly ambiguous. For example, is this charming or dull? This is a picture of the victims of the Holocaust. Is this charming or dull? Or is it simply just wrong? Well, many of us, I would take a gander at saying that many of us would say, this is just wrong. So we need to consider what it means for something to be objectively right, for what objective morality actually means. So, few deny that some acts are always morally wrong. For example, the list that we gave, the picture that we just saw, right? Few are going to argue that those things are right. Now, I have come across in my apologetic encounters that people have said that those things are sheer preferences. If it is your preference to rape, then it is like Baskin-Robbins up in here. It's 31 flavors, and you do what you do, but I think that's wrong. Okay. This equates to there being objective moral values and duties in life. If we say that those things on the previous list are wrong, then we're hinting at, we're scratching at this idea of objective morality. Go ahead and click. Louise Antony says, any argument against objective reality of moral values will be based on premises that are less obvious than the existence of objective moral values themselves. Let that sink in. What does that, how does that hit you? It's nonsense? Okay. Okay.
I heard a similar argument that was like any denial of truth is less obvious than here's my left hand and here's my right hand. And any denial of the existence of the external world
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think she is right. Right? Because of what we saw on the last slide and the pictures. To deny objective reality of moral values, to say that there is none, puts you in a very precarious predicament when faced with the topics that we looked at on the previous slide. It puts you in a very precarious situation, especially when you're confronted with the Holocaust and ask the question, right or wrong? Well, as this philosopher has said, it seems rather obvious. It seems obvious that that is wrong. But to say that is wrong is, again, to begin to scratch the surface of objective morality. So let's define our terms. Objective, independent of opinion. So this was off of this deck is old, so I'm not sure where I received this, but 51% of the population said rape was right. It would still be wrong. Right? So what do we get from just that? If 51% of people said rape was right, doesn't that just make it right? No. And the most ardent atheist that I've talked to would say, well, of course not. Why? Well, again, we're scratching the surface, but that's also a hint that maybe culture and people don't determine ethical objectivity. So objective, what we mean is independent from opinion. Like Ben Shapiro says, the facts don't care about your feelings. Okay, and that's very much the case here. The facts, objective morality does not care about your feelings. You can deny it all day long, but it is still a fact that must be dealt with. Values, whether something is good or bad, a description of worth. Whether something is good or bad, a description of worth. The idea of values, the idea of putting value upon something is just as inescapable as the bigger question that we're talking about. You are hardwired to give value to certain things. For example, my mother always put Brussels sprouts in front of me. Now, I absolutely despise that food. I think if it was possible for God to make a mistake, that was it. Okay? So, but I ascribe value to a lot of other things. Water is objectively terrible. Dr. Pepper, objectively good. Yeah, I know. I get it. So, duties indicates an oughtness of action, whether an act is obligatory. Now, this one right here, duties, think of the question, why? Why is the big question that we have to answer? And any argument that's going to come against objective morality or its the counter arguments, we have to go, okay, but why? All right. So, we have to have certain things in order to advance the argument. One, we need a standard. Now, the standard provides a measure of good and bad, right or wrong. We need an authority. Some things that someone or something that has the right to impose a standard and enforce adherence. Now, when we're looking at when we're looking at these two criteria, a standard and an authority, this is where we have to dig just a little bit deeper. Okay, so what we're going to see throughout this, what we're going to see is that in the argument against objective morality, you are going to find a standard, right? The question is that standard legitimate? And if it is legitimate, then why? And what those proponents against objective morality will say is they are going to give a standard, but they cannot. They are unable to give the why. And we're going to see some quotes here. Now, no, that's fine. Go ahead. So C.S. Lewis, I don't know if y'all have ever heard of him. A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line, right? So this applies beautifully, right? How do we know that there is an objective morality? Well, we part of the answer, just a fraction of the answer, is that the fact that we have this distinguishing between right and wrong, right? Because this principle applies. If you have a concept of good, you have that because you understand what bad is. You wouldn't have these terms if there wasn't something to contrast. Just like you wouldn't have the ability to say something is crooked unless you had an idea of what straight was. Go ahead. So, distinctions are important. There's a distinction between the source of objective moral values and duties and how we come to know them. Okay, so we have two additional criteria or lenses by which we look at this question. The first is an ontological, that is the source or origin. We have to answer that question. Where do they come from? Not just that they exist, right? We're not going to commit the Darwin flaw where we say it's the origin of species, but we don't actually give the origin, right? So we're not looking, we need to answer, if you're going to say something is right or something is wrong, you need to give the origin. This directly correlates to our standard. Okay? Then we're going to have our epistemological lens that we have to answer the how do you know? How do you know what you say you know when it comes to morality? And we're going to hopefully answer a couple of those tonight. All right, so we're going to examine the options. Now, before we do that, I want to cover just a couple of additional things. First, I want to set the contrast of what we're going to look at with the options. The first contrast is going to be the idea of moral relativism. Okay, are we all familiar with what moral relativism is? I don't want to insult your intelligence by giving you a definition.
Is moral relativism more ontological or epistemological?
Moral relativism can be both. It can be both. It can be ontological in that there's still no source or why does it exist? Its origin in moral relativism. Even though you could say that at the heart of moral relativism, especially when it comes to ethics, is really a will type of thing, right? Because as Dr. Craig has said numerous times, right? Most people are relativists only when it comes to morality, right? He uses the Tylenol and the rat poison, right? You're not a relativist when it comes to determining which is the rat poison and which is the Tylenol. You're going to look at those, and one is going to say rat poison, one's going to say Tylenol, and you're like, that was true for you, but it's not true for me, right? Nobody does that. And if they do, they don't live long enough to tell you about it. Okay. So moral relativism, and then we want to look at moral subjectivism. These are the contrasts. Now, these two terms get conflated. They get thrown together, but they are very different terms. Okay, so we moral relativism is encompassed by that phrase. It's right for you, but not for me. Right? That is a perfect summation of moral relativism. Right? You have your code of ethics. I have mine. So just don't impose yours on me, and I won't on you, and we'll all be good. Now, moral subjectivism will take this even further. Okay? Moral subjectivism is going to be, not only are you not going to tell me what is right and wrong for me, but I will decide on my own, I will decide what is right and what is wrong. So this is a further, more sinister step than moral relativism. This is truly secular humanism. This is the banner of secular humanism, in that you are the standard of all things, and all things will be measured by you or by man in general, right? And moral subjectivism is exactly that. I have set my standard as to what is right and what is wrong. Not only you won't tell me, but you cannot give me any type of ethical guidance. You can't tell me anything is right or wrong. I'm not using that page. So without an absolute standard that transcends human opinion, these particular these principles will be completely without a standard. They're mutable, right? They change, they evolve, and we can see the natural consequences. So let's look at this. So we're going to look at four possible ideas or concepts of why objective or a source for objective morality. So one, the universe, society and culture, the individual, and then we will end on a transcendent creator. All right, so from the universe, Stephen Crane, a man said said to the universe, "Sir, I exist." Nevertheless, replied the universe, "the fact has not created in me the slightest feeling of obligation." Let that sink in. The universe just told that man, like I tell my kids, nobody cares. Nobody cares. My kids love that from me. They'll tell me their problems. I'm like, no, seriously, nobody cares. You're like, I'm really concerned about you as a father. You're right. So from a cause and effect standpoint, an effect must represent its cause in essence and nature, right? So if we have no standard of objective morality, if we take that away, then the fact that we see it, we have to say, well, if right action or bad action or us calling these things what we see them to be, that is the effect. But what is an effect of? Right? And so why? Right? We're going to ask the question, why? Why do those things exist? 2, how can an amoral, impersonal, meaningless, and purposeless universe accidentally create personal moral beings who are obsessed with meaning and purpose? Now, I want to unpack this just a little bit. One, we're using the words meaning and purpose. And what typically comes to mind when I talk to people is they're going, even atheists, the ardent atheists, hey, Byron, I have meaning and I have a purpose in my life. Okay, Joe, what is your purpose? Well, my purpose is that I love my family. I work for my family. I would bleed for my family. I would die for my family. My family is my purpose. And I would say, and? So what? So what? In the broad scope of things, what value does that really have? That is a broad, that is a surface level concept that actually begs us to go deeper. What does it mean? I always ask, what does it mean for you to love your family? And where do you get the idea of love? Right? If there's no moral objectivity, then this idea of love is something that cannot actually be understood. All right, go ahead. Yes. Now, that is always easily just thrown into more of a relativistic way. You know, that is my purpose. I love my family. I would do anything for my family. That may not be yours. And if that's not yours, well, good for you, right? Richard Dawkins, our beloved friend, says, humans have always wondered about the meaning of life. Life has no higher purpose than to perpetuate the survival of DNA. Life has no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Okay, so Mr. Dawkins, what do you mean by evil? Not only what do you mean when you use the term evil, but to negate its existence is to assume that the existence of that thing is possible. Go ahead.
Could he not be referring to the concept of evil as perceived by other people, but not by himself? The same way that I might say there are no leprechauns.
That is possible, but the corpus of his writing does not indicate that. This, when Dawkins talks about no evil, Dawkins is making an objective claim that evil as such doesn't exist. Why? Because evil would imply a moral standard, right? If you have no moral standard, you cannot have anything. If you don't have a moral standard, you can't have anything that would resemble evil. There would be none. Evil would be what is not your preference, right? Rape would be evil to you just because it's not, you prefer not to rape, right? So, good. Well, how do you know good if you don't have any concept of evil? All right, go ahead. Dr. Provine, this is the most depressing man. I mean, really, he is very, very depressing. All right. So when Darwin deduced the theory of natural selection to explain adaptations in which he had previously seen the handiwork of God, he knew that he was committing cultural murder. He understood immediately that if natural selection explained adaptations and evolution by descent were true, then the argument from design was dead, and all that went with it, namely the existence of a personal God, free will, life after death, immutable moral laws, and ultimate meaning. And I would like to say that in terms of an atheist, in terms of a materialist, that is what consistency looks like. That is consistency. He is clearly stating, making our case, that if you eliminate God, if you take a personal God out, then look what disappears from it. Free will, life after death, moral laws, and meaning. It all disappears. It's all gone. All right. So, this is depressing. From culture. In Kenya, the practice of beating is carried out. A close family relative of a young girl places a strand of beads around the young girl's neck. This effectively is a temporary engagement, and the relative can now have sexual relations with her. Some girls are beaded when they are 6 years old. Many young girls get pregnant and either have abortions or kill their babies at birth. When they reach adulthood, the girls will marry outside of their village, but taboo dictates the girls will never be able to marry if they keep their babies, resulting from beating. So the question is this terrible practice, is it right or is it wrong? Now, most that I've asked this to would say that's wrong. But again, I ask you why. Why is that wrong? By what standard? By what authority?
What if we think it's wrong, but they think it's right?
Well, that's clearly the case. That's not even a what if. I mean, that's clearly in Kenya, they definitely think this is right. But the fact that they think it is right does not answer the ontological or even epistemological question, which is why? And by what standard is this right? Now, we're answering the question, well, culture decides, right? Their culture has decided. And I'm going to dig deeper into that very thought. Well, that's, yes.
But like, how would you convince the atheist who's just like, they think it's right, so they can do whatever they want in their culture, which is the majority decides?
How would I convince them?
Yeah, like, how can you prove them wrong if they don't believe in a God? They don't think there's a standard. They just think society determines as a whole.
So my work with the atheist, I'm never out to, and it's really my apologetic method. I'm never out to convince them that I am right and they are wrong. What I am out to do is to say, look at the worldview that you have, and is this consistent with human experience? Right? Is it consistent with broader human experience to say that beating a young girl from the age of 6 is okay? Right? Does anybody really, do you see how that rubs up against human experience?
You're trying to give the atheist an example where they probably, almost all of them
Would say, yes,
they do think it's wrong.
it is wrong.
And you're showing them, like, how can you say that's wrong you're kind of exposing an inconsistency.
Yes,
in the worldview.
because the minute they say it's wrong, then you ask
And even if they don't
why.
say it, they're probably down deep. They're thinking, like, yeah, I wouldn't want that
Yes.
to happen to my sister or daughter or something.
That is absolutely right.
What if they're like more relativist? They think it's, even if all of us think it's wrong, if that certain culture thinks it's right, it's like up to them.
I'll get to that. I'll answer that. All right, go ahead. So if culture is the source of objective morals and duties, then widow burning can be morally acceptable. Cannibalism can be morally acceptable. Murder, same. Unforgiveness, same. Now that one is a little bit different. Not in that it disproves, but I think the idea of forgiveness, you have to unpack that a little bit more. Rape can be morally acceptable, and so gratuitously torturing innocent babies be morally acceptable. So what we're faced with is really what comes down to kind of a majority rules, right? As long as the general population is okay, this will determine the rightness or the wrongness of this. But the problem with this is you have to ask, what standard does culture generally have in determining what is right and wrong? There has to be, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but there has to be something else from which culture draws from to determine. Because in an evolutionary framework, you don't walk through the woods and stumble upon morality, right? It's not something that is observed naturally. It is a metaphysical thing. Okay. All right, so we have the Nuremberg trials. So the defense attorney argues that Hitler's soldiers who were on trial were only following orders of their society and should therefore be held accountable. A judge countered the argument with the question, "But sir, is there not a law above our laws?" What is that? What is that judge getting at? Because he made the cultural argument for Auschwitz. He made the cultural argument for all the camps, for more than 6,000 Jews and many more people to be systematically exterminated. And this defense attorney is saying, well, it's okay because they were ordered to do so. But what is the judge getting at? Right. Society is not the authority. Right? Is there not a law above our laws? Well, that only leads you to one thing. So we need an ultimate authority to appeal to in matters of that transcend history, culture, and society. Right? This goes back fundamentally to our concept of truth, and this is where it really gets down epistemologically. Right? That epistemological framework is truth. We have to work at truth, because if you deny that there are some things that are true for all people at all times, everywhere, if you can deny that, then moral relativism is the conclusion, right? Because moral relativism excludes, by its very nature, excludes any concept of ultimate truth. Now they use the word truth, right? It's true for you, but not true for me. So we're using that word. But ultimately, there has to be a a standard by which we are intellectually. I'm intellectually, there has to be a standard by which we're measuring things. So if there is no big truth, capital T truth, right? No ultimate truth that transcends all people at all times, then rationality itself completely deteriorates, right? There is no conversation that can happen because you have a meaningless mess. I mean, this is what Ludwig Wittgenstein in his philosophy of language, language itself begins to crumble when there's no objectivity to anything. And what Cornelius Van Til, that quote at the beginning, says that the facts, the truth, it all ties back into a creator. It has to. It has to. All right. Yeah. Okay, go ahead. So, what or who is mankind morally obligated to? Real moral obligations exist, but to whom? Consider the issue of the reformer's dilemma. How can a culture ever be positively influenced from the outside if the culture is the determiner of good and evil? Give me your thoughts on this last point. How does that strike you?
If the culture were the standard of good and evil, then the reformer would necessarily be wrong because he disagrees with the culture.
Yes. Right.
The reformer's coming from within.
Mm-hmm.
And the culture, I mean, if you argue that the culture defines the standard, then that defines the standard subject to change if the culture changes.
Yes.
So really all the reformer is doing is arguing for a change in the culture, which would then change, they can't argue it from the basis of good or bad. They're just saying, hey, there's another reason why we should change our culture other than right or wrong.
Yes. I would agree. Because if the culture is the determiner, right, then you are confined. You are confined ontologically, epistemologically. You are confined to that context, right? So we would be confined to American culture. There couldn't be any move higher than this. This is it, and the morals and mores that we have in 2020 are going to be different than we have in 2030 because culture shifts, right? We saw that in our own culture, right? We have seen things over the decades. We have seen things that have come to be considered norm that were not considered norm previously, that were considered immoral are now no longer immoral. Did you know in the DSM-5, well, it would have been the DSM-4, either 3 or 4, that homosexuality was considered a mental disorder, right? They put it as a mental disorder. Now, if you read through, and if you want some light reading, if you read through the DSM-5, it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychology. If you read through the DSM-5, you don't see homosexuality in there anymore. Now, what happened there? Did all of a sudden they found a cure? Right? That all of a sudden that your psychotherapist has now found a way to, you were once gay, but now you are not?
They discovered the biological application of it. It's like the appendix. They used to think it was useless, and then they realized that it wasn't.
That would have been a much more credible way of it being taken out of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. You know why? It was cultural consensus. And the pressure on the committee was that there are activist groups now, and this is just not good PR to keep it as a mental disorder. So they took it out. They do. They do. Okay. So the point of that is that if cultural is the standard, right? We've seen the effects of culture being the standard. It shifts and evolves.
The following perspective I don't agree with, but like I think the way that a relativist would think about reform is sort of like that cultural mythos of the eternal upward climb of like the morality of society, where it's like we're a lot better than we were a long time ago. I think the relativist would be like the reformer was reforming with respect to the future, and the future is the present now. But I really think that the relativist is still wrong anyway.
But you can't say it's upward, because you can't say that your cultural now is better than it was in the past. It's just different.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, because you would still be ascribing value, good or bad, to that progression, right? We are more evolved now than we were in the past, right? It's implied that the less evolved was not the right state to be in, and so the more evolved is the better state to be in. Well, why? Why is that good? Why is that bad, and why is that good? You still have the nagging question of why. Where is it rooted in? Okay, go ahead. Okay, cool. So how do you decide between differing moral opinions if each individual is the ultimate decision maker of what is good and bad? How does the statement, for me, rape is wrong, but it might be okay for you? How's that sound? With individuals, everything boils down to emotion and emotive responses to morals without moral global absolutes. Now, this is much more, this gets down to a deeper level. One, that when it comes to a relativism of morals or the forsaking of moral objectivity, or objectivity as a concept, right? It only takes place in the realms of morals, of ethics, and religion, right? In the disciplines that are represented here, how many times from your professors in your discipline have they said, we're going to go through this, but this is true for me, but not for you? In electrical engineering, they've said that?
Yep.
That's dangerous.
You're kidding.
The flow of electrons and the flow of current, and like there's like the conventional current.
Oh, okay.
That frankly
You should
being
give it a
wrong
try.
does not mean that electricity suddenly works different.
Yeah, we just defined it wrong. Yeah,
He
but it's-
defined it wrong.
Well, some people like alternate current, some people like direct current. So that's a matter of
Oh, okay, so bad example.
Your phone absolutely will care.
Huh. All right, go ahead, Kenneth. You know what, we can skip this one. We won't go through that. Okay, so people may espouse relativism, but they demand absolutes. We've seen this is self-evidently true when it comes to our society. Okay, watching how people react to being wronged proves that they want to recognize absolute morality. Now, That is personal inflicting of wrong on an individual. Nobody says, "Oh, that's okay. That was right for you. Hit me again, sir." No, nobody says that, right? They demand that they be treated a certain way, right? They have the idea of respect and value. Okay, so the question is, why? Why? And I would argue ultimately that the reason why is because of the image of God. Right? The answer to why people demand absolutes is because the image of God. They are made in a certain image, and the image of God is the only thing that gives value, purpose, and meaning. And the image of God and necessitates the existence of who? God. Right? That is the only answer. That is the only answer to the why that actually stands up to scrutiny. Is the only answer to why that transcends space, time, and cultures. Steal from a relativist, let them be the victim of false advertising. Watch how they respond when their spouse is relatively faithful to them versus absolutely faithful. And the reaction showcases the recognition of, that's interesting. I didn't complete that. But again, why does the spouse demand faithfulness? In your relationships, why does your girlfriend demand faithfulness? Why does your fiance demand faithfulness? Because there's an absolute. There's fidelity and there's infidelity. Fidelity is right, infidelity is wrong. Why? Because infidelity is a disrespect to an image bearer. Is disrespect to an image bearer. This is why the scripture, and in the Old Testament, this is why blood was demanded for blood taken. Why? Because when you murder, you mar the image of God on that individual. And so God demands the blood. He sets the absolutes. Science cannot tell you if it is right or wrong for you to eat your own baby's clone, but it can tell you that what you are actually doing. Then you can decide for yourself if you think it's right or wrong. No. It's wrong at all times, at all places, because one image bearer does not eat another image bearer. Right? God is the only reason. Go ahead and click. You are right in speaking of moral foundations of science, but you cannot turn around and speak of scientific foundations for morality. His hair gets it. It is firmly rooted on his head. And he understands the materialist that he was. He understands that morality, the right and wrong, science cannot tell you those things. That is a limitation of science. Why? Because science deals with the physical. Now, I know those that are in physics and the higher sciences, I get it, okay? Just for this, I get that there can be things that are highly theoretical that we haven't seen. I understand. But for my point here, for Einstein, it dealt with things that were observable, things that were testable. And he realized that morality was just not one of those things, yet there is a foundation for it. We don't have time to walk through Harris's, so click the next few slides. I know, and that is a great book for our discussion and walking through that, but I will spend the next hour walking through that. So we're not going to do that. So we've seen the universe, society and culture, and the individual cannot be, because there is no standard, there is no authority. So we come to the transcendent creator. Now, as a reasonable faith group, we're all aware of the moral argument for God's existence. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. But what we've clearly seen is that objective moral values and duties do exist. And it's not based off culture, it's not based off science, it's not based off individuals, it's not based off the universe, it's based off God. Therefore, because these things exist, it just logically follows that God exists. God is the ultimate standard. Yes, that is correct. So, J.L. Mackie, we might well argue that objective, intrinsically prescriptive features supervenient upon natural ones constitute so odd a cluster of qualities and relations that they are unlikely to have risen in the ordinary course of events without an all-powerful God to create them. He could have just said that last part. That's a lot of word salad. But Mackie understands. Go ahead.
Well, why did he say this? Like, it seems like he's repeating anything he could have been saying otherwise. What was the context of this statement?
So this comes from his book. I can see it on my shelf. Let me get back to you on that. I'll look that up, and I'll get back to you on the exact context. So the ordinary course of events that he refers to is nature. So Mackie, J.L. Mackie had a little bit of a journey from kind of biological evolution, and he's questioned that. He began to question that, not full commitment, but that's what he's talking about. That you can't find in nature objective morality. All right, go ahead, click through that. We don't have time. Yeah, don't have time. Okay, so conclusion. Go ahead. God provides the only objective standard for moral values. God provides the only transcendent authority for enforcing the oughtness of moral duties. Right? So the why that I've been talking about, is that why answers the oughtness, right? That's what ethics deals with, is the oughtness. And so for us to say something is objectively moral, something is objective in terms of morals, that objectivity, I'm trying to get my thoughts out, that objectivity has to include some type of obligation, some kind of oughtness, right? Relativism takes away the oughtness. It takes it away. But there has to be something that obligates us to that right, to what is right, or to what is wrong. Okay. All right. So just a tag. The Institute for Integrated Apologetics is a nonprofit that I'm working on starting in order to help get people more to be more effective, to go deeper in their apologetic studies. So we'll have a series of courses and things like that, and an active blog. If this is something that you're interested in wanting to blog, we're always looking for contributors. So you can see me. So that is it. Any questions, concerns, slide remarks?
Would you say that moral oughtness is like a basic sense perception, sort of like sight or sound? that what I was wondering to myself was like when you talk about moral relativism, you can ask them the question like why whenever they posit something moral. But then if you posit God, and I do agree with moral objectivism, but like when you posit God as an authority, even then I say like why, even if I'm presented with an authority. And so like is the connection between authority and like the perception of obligation sort of a sensory thing?
I wouldn't say it would be sensory. I think that um, authority and obligation, the positing of God, the positing of oughtness, is an innate from my perspective is an innate understanding, right? It's just like nobody had to teach you. Is the old example. Nobody has had to teach you to disobey your parents, right? You've always known that disobeying was wrong, or not to murder. You didn't have to go murder to find out that it was wrong, right? There's an innate sense, and I get that innateness because of the image of God, right? I assume God, because that is as Cornelius Van Til said, everything goes back onto God. You can't even have this conversation without positing God. And we wouldn't even have the concept of oughtness if we didn't posit God.
And I can't, we can't ask why at this point just because of the intrinsic connection between oughtness and obligation and authority?
I would say so.
Okay.
I would say
You could say God, by his very nature, he's
yes.
omniscient. He would know all moral truths.
And that's a
He
whole
created
section I
all of
didn't
us
do.
out of nothing. Then I mean, there's a natural level of obligation just from that. On that
Right,
basis.
because yes, and I think that's absolutely right. Because when we're positing God, we're positing him as the standard, right? Because he's holy, he's good, he's just. His attributes, his perfection, is why he is the standard of good. So to ask why is God the standard? I mean, the simple answer is because he's perfect. And you may, well, I don't believe God. It doesn't really matter because innately you're making that comparison automatically. You make the case by your behavior.
Now, there are people for whom there does not exist an innate sense of morality. There are people who just genuinely don't feel much empathy towards other people, or much of a sense of why should I do this over another. I have encountered some of them.
Okay.
I don't think this necessarily counts as a. I'm not sure this goes all the way to a counter argument because blind people do not disprove the existence of life.
I was just about to say that.
That right. That's right. But I would say just because one does not have the ability to feel empathy, or just has a general apathy about other people's well-being, I don't think is necessarily an absence of for them, an innate sense of right and wrong. Because I think when you take away, if you operate from a standard of they don't have an innate sense, if I didn't have an innate sense, then what actually stops me from going and just murdering willy-nilly? Well, that would include that I would have a sense in which that was a sense which that is right and wrong. But if I don't,
It could just be personal greed, personal self-interest. I would rather not deal with the police beating my door down, so I'm not going to kill someone.
Greg Coco puts it in, if you don't mind.
no, I don't mind at all. Go for
Greg
it.
Coco puts it in the sense that a moral system can be evaluated based off of its sort of heroes, where if a moral system based off of passive resistance and nonviolence has a hero of Mahatma Gandhi, a moral system that prioritizes concern for the poor above all else gets a Mother Teresa. A moral system that's based off of somebody not attending to other people's perception drawn, produces as its brightest star a sociopath. And there's something wrong with a moral system that produces a sociopath as its sort of hero.
Right.
And yet our current culture seems to be going towards celebrating sociopaths.
In a sense.
I've heard that empathy is associated with an overlap between self-perception and the perception of others in the brain, and that makes me think that like our perception of altruism is like an epistemological thing. But under what circumstances can we like derive from the epistemological warrant that we've seen morality, the ontological existence of morality? Like, do all epistemologies imply ontologies behind them?
That's a very good question. Do all epistemologies imply an ontology behind them? I would. Now, I'm not going to be able to walk this all the way out for you, but I would say that from a theistic point of view, that yes, all epistemologies have an ontology behind them.
There must be some truth, some ontology.
Yes. Yeah.
I think C.S. Lewis would also say that, especially
Yeah, absolutely.
things that have to do more with God, where he says, like, one of the things he says is, I believe in God not only because in the same way that I believe in the sun,
Right.
not only because I see the sun, but because by
But I see everything else.
Also, like, existence of the sun is so innate to our understanding of the rest of the world, it's so innate to our epistemology, that it does imply an ontology.
Yes.
That's not the case for everything, but when it comes to the most fundamental things about, I guess, human existence, it probably is more true.
Because and I would say I would even add to that in saying that the very idea of a noetic structure, the structure of the mind to be able to develop knowledge or to receive knowledge is only a system that is only a system that comes to be if God exists. And rationality is one of the things that the atheist has to explain. How does rationality come about if God doesn't exist? And so I would absolutely, just on a broad level, I would say it would have to, in the very idea that you have epistemologies.
What would you say to someone who just throws the phrase emergent property at things like this? Because
What would I
say that, but I also don't think it's the right answer. Because I agree with you.
Okay.
But like, I feel like every single one of these situations would be responded to with a phrase such and such is an emergent property.
So define how in this way that you've heard it, define how they're using emergent property.
I think that's the right question to ask.
Yeah, it's often just a statement of, if we have no clue about anything, we can just say it's an emergent property. But
Then you can say emergence from what?
Emergent property is determined to be inherent in the nature of the system. It just maybe hasn't manifested itself because of the progress of the system, but it's determined to be inherent. So the question is, what is it about the universe that you're observing that
Yes.
suggests an inherent morality so that it would be emergent?
Yes.
that's a great way of putting it.
That's
Electricity is an emergent property of particle motion. So again, we can look at the particles, we can look at the electrons moving, sense them, and call that electricity. What are you sensing to call morality?
Mm-hmm.
Which is way it's emergent.
Yep.
Would you say that emergent properties are still true in the same way that the basic things are?
Now basic.
I guess like the reductionist statements that like maybe you just have some very large field equation for the universe, but then like the Gauss's laws apply to an electrical system. Like Gauss's laws are still true in some sense, even though they're emergent.
Yeah, I think that there are things that are epistemologically speaking are properly basic. That those are things that we naturally assume that we don't need any evidence for, right? And yes, I do think that in terms of those basicalities, well, I would be hesitant to say that those basicalities are emergent properties as what would be typically thrown out, right? These are they would be emergent properties in the sense that they ebb and flow from the nature of God. God is being the source.
We're out of
All right.
time at this point, but thank you so much, Byron. That was great talk.
All right. We can see each other at the Roses Cafe north of Bush because they have cheap tacos on Tuesdays. Yeah. Huh? I know. Oh, yeah.